So you want to take your model from gray to slay as fast as you can while still keeping decent quality. Let's talk about Slapchop, the best techniques, tricks, and products to get you and your miniature to the table faster.
Quickly, what is Slapchop?
Slapchop, as coined by Rob the Honest Wargamer, is actually a technique that has been around for years.
And I mean years.
For us, it's the combination of zenithal highlighting with translucent paints to add color to our previously applied highlights and shadows. The hope is that this will give us a higher quality model at a far faster rate than other speed painting techniques. Here's what you'll need: a miniature, a domed brush, a dry palette like this one from Redgrass Games, black, gray, and white paint, white artist acrylic paint, a paper towel, and some transparent paints. We want a dry palette as we want to work with paint on the drier side. Your domed brush should be tightly packed and short bristled. I like a domed brush because it doesn't leave harsh streaks like a flat brush tends to do. First, we'll start with the classic Slapchop technique. 1. Paint your model black. My primer is black, so that's a great bonus for me. 2. Add in your midtone gray.
We want to use this gray specifically because it is halfway between our black and white. If this is going to be a regular technique for you, then go out and buy a midtone gray.
For me, I'm mixing one on my palette. Spread your paint onto your palette and then load your brush by placing the head onto the puddle of paint and rolling it in a circular motion. Spreading out our paint will help make sure we don't waste paint by loading too much paint onto your brush and then having to wipe away so much of it on the paper towel. We want to remove approximately 80% of the paint from your brush onto the paper towel. This small amount of paint that's left on your brush is what's going to allow us to highlight those raised edges.
You'll know you've removed enough paint when you push against your paper towel with hard pressure and you can hardly see any paint from your brush on the paper towel. So seriously, remove more paint than you think you should and focus more on multiple layers instead of a single application.
3. Once the paint is properly loaded, pull your brush downward on your model. Pulling your brush downwards helps highlight the areas that would naturally be hit by the sun, but we also want to get any flat areas from the top as well. In short, brush down, across, but be very cautious of painting upwards. I recommend starting with a light touch to get the feel for your brush. The harder your pressure, the more paint you will apply, and the deeper into the recesses you will apply your paint. So use a heavy hand on areas you need to, but in general, go light.
A quick tip, do not get your domed brush wet.
Or if you do, dry it thoroughly. If there is water in your brush, then water could mix with your paint, and then you won't be dry brushing anymore. 4. Repeat the previous step, but with white paint. Again, use a very light hand, focusing on the top half of the model. Remember that our eyes are automatically drawn to the brightest part of the figure, so focus your white on the most important elements. 5. Repeat the previous step using an acrylic or artist white paint, only hitting the very top edges of the model. When I first started this, I wasn't expecting the artist white to make that big of a difference, but it definitely does.
Before we go on to applying our translucent paint, I have a few experiments I want to do.
First was a black model with a white dry brush. My theory was that by removing the gray step, I could speed up my paint application, instead creating a smoother gradation by applying varying degrees of white through the pressure of my brush. However, that's not really what happened. Instead, the time I saved by skipping the gray step was eaten up by my attempts of creating that same gradation with just white paint. The results. The contrast is quite severe, even with my attempts at building up that slow gradation. And that contrast definitely showed through my colors, making her look more like a statue than a human woman. Second is experimenting using a colored base color. I'm painting the whole model a deep blue, then creating a middle color then dry brushing the same as before up to my pure artist white. Then it's translucent paint on top. Here is what the colored version and a black version look like side by side. There is a difference, but across the table, you won't be able to tell. Third is a white base and washes. First was applying a wash over the whole model. But because of the flowing fabric, it did not go well. If my model was more heavily textured, then this might have been great, but for this model, not a good choice. For round 2, I focused my black wash on the textured and detailed areas, then feathered out the edges of the wash with a damp brush to prevent coffee staining. Instead of just pitching this blue version, I'm going to see if I can salvage it. I have decided to create a paint color similar to the midtone that appears on my model, and then dry brushing from there up to my pure white. Surprisingly, I really like how it looks. The wash sunk into the recesses as expected, but I was able to blend out those ugly harsh puddles with my dry brush and actually created a pretty smooth gradation. The takeaway. Most of your models will look great with the classic Slapchop, but there are a few instances where you could do better. If you want to do grimdark, then black, white over top. If you're not so worried about contrast, instead wanting to just pick up the details and focus on color, then the wash with dry brush over top will be perfect. I like the wash and dry brush better than just the wash in the detailed areas because the dark wash still tinted the white, causing the vibrancy in my colors to diminish. I suppose you could still do a dark wash in the detailed areas, but I highly recommend dry brushing over top like I did in my previous example. So now that we have our base layers figured out, what's next? Let's talk about translucent paint. There are 3 translucent paints I tried in this video: contrast paints, speed paints, and inks. Contrast paints are the standard for the Slapchop method, but I was pretty unhappy with them when applying them with a brush. They were somehow too opaque and pulled in the recesses too much. This is particularly troublesome in large open areas, like the skirt of this dress. I even tried to wipe away the excess to lessen the pooling, and it still didn't work as well as I wanted it to. We've already added in the shadows via our zenithal highlights. We don't need the paint to sink into the recesses and darken those areas even further. However, creating a 50-50 mixture of contrast paint and contrast medium created something far less opaque that I liked a lot better. It still pooled quite a bit, but it left a more even tint across the model as a whole. The army paints were far less opaque than my contrast paints. I also thought that the army paints left a far more even coverage compared to the contrast paints. My favorite translucent paint actually came as a bit of a surprise: Scale 75 Intensity Set. These colors are intense and do need to be thinned, but they don't sink egregiously into the recesses, leave an even pass of color, and work especially well on areas like the fabric that I was having so much trouble with the contrast paints. I've also found inks to just be a lot more versatile overall. Just remember that a little bit goes a very long way. If you like the idea of working with translucent paints, then be sure to check out this video right here where I talk about using translucent paints with your airbrush.